The sirens echoed in the distance, but I was already inside the house. The smell of burning incense mixed with something metallic, like iron or blood, clung heavy in the air. Flickering light from dozens of candles formed a circle on the floor, and in the center, a group of hooded figures chanted in unison, words I couldn't understand. Sweat trickled down my temples, my finger tight on the trigger, knowing any sudden move could turn the place into a massacre. Then a scream tore through the ritual silence, not one of faith, but of pure despair. A body was shoved to the ground, bound, its mouth gagged with a soaked cloth. My heart was pounding, but what froze me completely was when one of the hooded men lifted his head, and through the slit of his mask I saw eyes I recognized. The same eyes of a man I had arrested years ago, a man who, according to official records, was supposed to be dead. I was born and raised in the outskirts of São Paulo, where the law seemed like nothing more than a distant rumor, a word spoken on the news but never reaching the dirt street where we played soccer. My father was a bus driver, a man of calloused hands and heavy silence. My mother, a seamstress who spent sleepless nights at her machine trying to support 3 children. I was the oldest, and I learned early that life had no room for dreamers. My childhood friends were swallowed by drugs, theft, and the quick promises of easy money. For reasons I still can't fully explain, I chose to walk the opposite path. Maybe it was my mother's tired gaze, maybe my father's unspoken weight, maybe the fear of ending up like the boys I saw stretched out on the asphalt before I was even 15. When I joined the police, it wasn't out of romantic vocation or heroism, but out of survival, a need to bring order into the chaos that shaped me. At first, I wore the uniform like a suit of armor, convincing myself it made me immune to the filth of the world. I learned quickly that it didn't. The streets don't respect uniforms, don't forgive hesitation, don't forget mistakes. I learned how to shoot before I ever learned how to sleep peacefully. I learned to suspect every corner before I trusted any promise. And yet, deep inside, something kept me standing. The conviction that, even drowning in mud, someone has to keep their head above water. Over time, I watched colleagues drown in alcohol, watched men sworn to protect fall to corruption, watched families destroyed by stray bullets. I carry scars no medical exam will ever show, but they bleed every time I close my eyes at night. Some nights I wake drenched in sweat, reliving the gunfire of a failed robbery where I lost my partner. He was only 27, with 2 young kids and an easy smile that still believed in tomorrow. The crack of the bullet that killed him still echoes inside me, and it's why I've never been able to treat an occurrence as just another job. Every call could be the last. Every door I open might be hell, waiting on the other side. I live in constant contradiction. To society, I am the embodiment of law, the voice of authority. Inside, I am just a man trying to hold himself together, stitching up my own cracks before they finally break me apart. I have a 10-year-old daughter, the only light left after a marriage that didn't survive the weight of this life. She is the reason I still believe there's hope in this darkness. When I hear her small voice on the phone calling me hero, I feel both pride and shame. Pride because I want to be that for her. Shame because heroes don't hide behind sleeping pills or avoid mirrors before leaving for another shift. My beliefs, my values were forged through loss and impossible choices. I no longer believe in good versus evil in their purest forms. I've learned everyone carries their own darkness, me included, but I still believe there are lines that cannot be crossed, boundaries that, once broken, turn us into unrecognizable monsters. That's why, even exhausted, I keep going. Not to be a saint, but to stop what little order we have from collapsing into complete chaos. Whenever I receive a call, no matter how trivial it seems, something inside me locks into place like a trigger mechanism. I remember the dirt street where I grew up. I remember my daughter's eyes. I remember my partner's coffin. It's in this cauldron of memories and scars that my decisions are forged. Every time I step into an unknown house, every time I raise my gun, It's like throwing my soul onto the scales of justice, praying it still weighs more than the darkness closing in around me. I am a police officer, yes, but above all, I am human, and that is my greatest burden, to face the worst of humanity every single day, without letting it turn me into the very abyss I fight against. It was early evening when the radio crackled inside the patrol car, shattering the heavy silence of the shift. I was already tired, my body begging for rest, but my mind stayed sharp, trained to live in a state of permanent vigilance. The metallic voice of the dispatcher came through with an anonymous call. Residents reported screams coming from an old, almost abandoned house at the end of a narrow street in a distant neighborhood. At first, it sounded like just another domestic fight, another heated argument that would end in a police report. But there was something in the way the dispatcher described the call that put me on edge. Neighbors spoke of chanting, of voices in chorus, of sounds that didn't resemble a simple argument. I grabbed the radio and confirmed I'd take the call, even though I could have left it for another unit. Something inside me never allows me to ignore these situations. I've seen too many tragedies begin as just some noise and end with bodies being carried out in black bags. My intuition has always been my sharpest weapon, and that night it screamed louder than protocol. As I drove toward the location, my eyes scanned the poorly lit streets, feeling that strange pressure in my chest that always comes before the unexpected. The neighborhood was unnaturally quiet, as if even the dogs had decided to stop barking. Windows shut tight, curtains drawn, no sign of life outside. That's never a good sign. When fear spreads through a street, it means something larger than an argument is unfolding. On the way, a memory clawed its way back. Years earlier, another vague call had led me into a shack where I thought I was, breaking up domestic violence. Instead, I found an entire family being held hostage by traffickers, using the home as a hideout. That night I learned that walls hide more than eyes can see, and that we should never underestimate the darkness that takes root in ordinary places. That memory made my grip on the wheel tighten, my pulse racing with the same dread of knowing how thin the line between life and death really is. When I reached the street in question, I slowed down. The headlights, illuminated peeling facades, graffiti-stained walls, houses frozen in time. The address was the last one on the block, a two-story house that loomed like a carcass. Its windows were boarded up with rotting planks, the gate rusted and bent. It looked abandoned, but the screams reported couldn't come from nothing. I parked a few meters back, killed the siren and lights, letting the engine die into silence. That's when I heard it, faint at first, then clearer, the distant murmur of voices rising and falling in rhythm. It wasn't conversation. It wasn't fighting. It was ritual. I picked up the radio again, reported my arrival, and requested backup. The answer was short and merciless. All units occupied. You'll have to hold position until support arrives. That's the line no officer wants to hear, because it means you're alone in the dark. I exhaled slowly, feeling the full weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. This wasn't the first time I'd been left to face danger. Alone. But it never feels easier. Isolation on the job is a cruel thing. It forces you to make decisions in seconds that may scar you for life. I moved toward the house, steps calculated, breath controlled. The closer I got, the louder the chants became, layered with something else, a muffled cry for help, a woman's voice, gagged, fighting to break through the wall of voices drowning her. The urgency in that sound hit me harder than any command. This was no longer suspicion. This was reality. What began as just a call on the radio was becoming something else entirely. Standing in the shadows outside that rusted gate, I realized I wasn't answering a simple complaint. I was standing at a crossroads, and stepping through that threshold wouldn't just mean confronting criminals. It meant confronting a secret buried deep in the dark, ready to consume anyone foolish enough to disturb it. And alone, with nothing but my weapon and my heartbeat echoing in the night, I understood there was no turning back. The street felt dead when I parked the patrol car a few meters from the house. With the engine off, the silence pressed in so thick I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. The streetlights were failing, some completely out, others flickering weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. At the end of the road stood the house in question, isolated from the others as if even the neighboring homes wanted nothing to do with it. Its walls were stained with damp, the paint peeling, and the windows sealed with nailed planks. It had the appearance of abandonment, but the voices leaking through the air told another story. The gate hung slightly open, creaking under the push of the cold night wind. As I stepped closer, the chanting grew clearer, voices in rhythm, repeating in cadences that rose and fell like some twisted melody. It wasn't Portuguese. It wasn't any language I could identify. It sounded like words not meant to be understood, only felt. Syllables that pressed down on my chest like invisible weight. Each step across the cracked pavement felt amplified, like the entire street could hear me coming. I scanned the windows around me, searching for a neighbor peeking through curtains, but every window was dark, every door shut. The absence of witnesses wasn't coincidence. It was fear. That kind of silence only happens when people know better than to get involved. I reached the gate and pushed it gently. The metal screeched open, the sound tearing through the night. For a moment, the voices inside stopped. My breath caught in my throat. Every muscle locked tight. Seconds ticked by before the chanting resumed. Louder this time, almost defiant, as if they knew I had crossed into their ground. The yard was a wasteland of tall weeds and broken furniture. Symbols daubed in fresh red paint marked the outer walls. Some smeared, others sharp, deliberate. Melted wax covered the ground in irregular patterns, as though countless. Candles had been burned there in ritual after ritual. The smell was overpowering, incense laced with something sour, organic, a stench that turned my stomach and whispered of pain long absorbed into the soil. I reached the heavy front door, scarred with scratches and nails sticking out. Leaning close, I heard shuffling steps, the slow drag of feet moving in a circle. Among the droning voices, a muffled scream broke through, clear this time. A woman, desperate, silenced almost immediately by the rising chorus around her. My chest tightened. This wasn't just ritual. Someone was in danger right now. I glanced back toward the street, praying for the sight of flashing lights, for backup that hadn't yet come. Nothing. No sirens, no engines, just emptiness. I was alone. Training told me to wait, to assess, to hold my position until support arrived. But instinct and experience screamed otherwise. I had seconds to decide, and I already knew I couldn't leave someone inside to suffer. My hand brushed the rough, cold wall, slick with moisture, and the sensation sent a shiver through me. The house felt alive, as if it rejected my touch, warning me that I didn't belong. The weight of fear settled on my shoulders, heavier than my vest. I gripped my gun tighter, flashlight in the other hand. I took one last deep breath at the threshold. The wood groaned as I pressed against it, the door opening just enough to let me slip inside. The moment a sliver of the interior was revealed, the deep chanting cut off again, leaving only the crackle of candles and the faint, panicked breath of whoever was trapped inside. And in that breathless silence, standing in the doorway, I knew this wasn't just another call. Whatever awaited me beyond that threshold, once I stepped across, there would be no return. I pushed the door open slowly, the creak of the wood echoing through the dark hall like an announcement of my arrival. My flashlight sliced through the shadows, revealing stained walls, covered in symbols drawn in red, some smudged and faded, others fresh enough to glisten under the beam. The air was thick, suffocating, heavy with the smoke of incense and wax, every breath weighing down in my lungs. I stepped inside, weapon raised, boots crunching on the brittle wooden floorboards that groaned beneath me. The chanting had stopped the moment I entered, and the silence that followed was more threatening than any sound. My eyes adjusted to the dim glow. In the center of the room stood a circle of candles, their flames dancing in an unnatural rhythm. Bound inside that circle lay a woman, eyes wide with terror, her mouth gagged with a filthy cloth. Her body shook violently, trembling as if life itself was slipping away from her. Around her, 5 hooded figures stood motionless, black silhouettes, their faces hidden, their attention locked on me. The room felt frozen, as though everyone was waiting for my next move. I steadied my voice, projecting authority, though my heart hammered in my chest. "Police! Release her now!" My words bounced against the cracked walls, swallowed by the stale air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of them, the one closest to the victim, lifted his head. Beneath the slit of his hood, his eyes caught the candlelight. Eyes I recognized. Familiar, too familiar. And then, as if my command had triggered them, they all began moving in unison. The chanting returned, louder than before, a deafening wall of sound that rattled my skull. The woman's body convulsed as she tried to scream through her gag, her desperation cutting through the noise like a blade. I stepped forward, closing the distance, flashlight on them, weapon locked on target. Every instinct screamed that I had stepped into something far bigger than a standard rescue. The smell hit me next. Coppery, pungent, unmistakable. Blood. My light flicked to a corner, and I saw a metal basin filled with dark liquid, something floating in it that I couldn't bring myself to identify. My stomach lurched, but I forced it down. No time for weakness. My mission was clear. Get her out. I barked the order again, louder, harder. "Release her or I shoot!" One of the figures lunged forward suddenly, too fast, forcing me back a step, my finger tightening on the trigger. But he stopped short, less than a meter from me, breathing hard, daring me. The others raised their voices, the chant swelling to a pitch that felt designed to break me down. My skin prickled, my chest tightened, but I held my ground. Then, over the cacophony, the woman's muffled scream tore through. Pure terror, raw and desperate. That was it. No more hesitation. I surged forward, shoving the nearest figure aside with the barrel of my gun, breaking the circle of candles as I moved. The heat of the flames licked my skin as I crossed into their ritual space. My blade cut through the ropes binding her wrists, her body collapsing into me, weak and trembling. And as I pulled her closer, one of the hoods slipped back in the chaos. The candlelight revealed a scar slicing across his eyebrow, a scar I knew, a scar belonging to a man I had personally put behind bars, who had died years ago inside a prison riot. For a split second, the world tilted. Logic collapsed. My pulse thundered as I stared at the impossible, alive and breathing before me. I had walked into a nightmare where the dead returned, where my past refused to stay buried. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a rescue. It was a trap, and I was already exactly where they wanted me. The bound woman's breathing was shallow, broken, as though every second was a struggle to keep consciousness. I held my weapon steady, trying to keep the nearest hooded figure in my sights, but the weight of what I was seeing pressed down on me like lead. The circle of candles threw trembling light across their faces, and then, in a movement so synchronized it felt rehearsed, all 5 of them pulled back their hoods at once. The chanting stopped. Silence fell, so thick it made my skin crawl. My eyes took a heartbeat too long to adjust, and then the shock hit me like a punch to the chest. 2 of those faces, I knew them. I had seen them in old case files, in morgue reports, in operations that were supposed to be finished. Dead men, officially buried, autopsied, and gone. Years earlier, I had stood over their bodies myself, watched the black bags zip shut, signed off on the reports that ended their stories. Yet here they were alive, eyes locked on me, mouths curling into grotesque smiles. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just the horror of seeing them alive, it was what it meant. Either the system was compromised in ways I couldn't fathom, false records, bodies swapped, lies buried deep, or I was staring into something far worse. And for a man who had always clung to facts, evidence, and hard truth, the collapse of logic was more terrifying than the figures themselves. One of them stepped forward. The candlelight revealed the scar across his eyebrow, the same scar I remembered before he bled out years ago. He met my gaze with a mix of contempt and triumph, and then, in a voice I never expected to hear again, he spoke. "We never died, officer. We were reborn." The words struck harder than the sound of any gunshot. The chanting rose again, this time lower, almost like whispers crawling beneath my skin. My flashlight caught movement at the edge of the room, an altar hidden in the shadows. Photos lay, scattered across it. Some yellowed with age, others freshly printed. My pulse hammered as I stepped closer, the beam settling on one photo that froze me completely. It was me, younger, freshly graduated, standing tall in uniform beside my late partner. My own face, my own history, displayed among symbols and scraps of newspaper clippings about unsolved crimes. They hadn't just chosen me that night. They had been watching me for years, following me, studying me. I wasn't an intruder. I was part of their design. The weight of that realization nearly buckled my knees. The question gnawed at me, louder than their chants, louder than the woman's muffled sobs. Why me? Why had I been marked long before stepping into this house? Before I could gather myself, a metallic sound rattled from the upper floor, chains dragging, footsteps heavy, deliberate. Something else was up there, something bigger than what I already faced. My flashlight caught dark stains seeping down the staircase. Blood. The woman tied at my feet thrashed violently, eyes wide with terror as if she knew what was coming. And in that moment, surrounded by the impossible, confronted by the dead who shouldn't exist, my own photo laid out like an offering and the sound of chains above, I understood the most brutal truth of all. I wasn't there to break up a ritual. I was the ritual. My finger was tight on the trigger, but my mind no longer obeyed the same command. The room spun around me, the chants echoing inside my skull as if they were my own thoughts. I was face to face with men I had sworn were dead, with proof that my past had been laid bare on a ritual altar, and with the terrifying sense that my very life had been scripted long before I stepped through that door. For the first time in years, I felt reason splintering inside me. The cop in me, the one trained to believe only in facts, evidence, reports, screamed that they were criminals, nothing more. They're flesh and blood just like you, I tried to convince myself. But the other side of me, the man scarred by too many nights of loss, whispered that no logic could explain what I was seeing. Maybe I wasn't just confronting a gang. Maybe I was standing in front of something far older, far darker, far beyond the reach of the law. Memories I fought to bury tore their way back. My partner's face, grinning in the moment before the bullet ripped him open. His blood pooling in my hands as I tried, uselessly, to hold his life in place. My daughter's voice calling me her hero when I know I can barely look myself in the mirror. The countless times I've hidden the tremor in my hands with pills and silence. And now, looking into the eyes of those resurrected from my past, guilt bled through every scar. Had I failed them once already? Was I failing again by standing frozen now? The woman's terrified eyes met mine, begging me for salvation, and in that reflection I saw the fracture inside me. Was I here to save her, or had I been lured here to be destroyed? The police officer in me demanded immediate action, decisive force, but the man beneath the uniform, the father, the survivor, the broken soul, feared that any move I made would only tighten the snare already closing around me. Rage boiled up, rage at the system that left me alone, rage at every ignored call that let these monsters thrive in the shadows, rage at myself for walking into this place without backup, for being caught exactly where they wanted me. But beneath the rage lay fear, not the fear of dying, but of facing something I couldn't categorize, couldn't explain, couldn't fight with bullets or training manuals. My weapon trembled, not from weakness, but from the crushing weight of choice. All my life I believed the uniform was a line between me and the abyss. Tonight, that line had vanished. Maybe I'd already crossed it years ago without noticing. Then came the thought that stabbed deepest. My daughter. If I fell here, would she grow up believing her father died? A hero? Or would she discover he fell because he broke under his own fears? That truth was more terrifying than the hooded figures surrounding me. I couldn't let my weakness become her inheritance. It felt as if I stood before two invisible doors. Through one, I could act, fulfill my duty, even if it cost me everything. Through the other, I could retreat, preserve my life, but lose the last fragments of faith I had in myself. Neither offered victory. Both demanded sacrifice. Sweat trickled down my neck. My breath came shallow, uneven. The room waited, the chants droned, the woman trembled, and the men stared at me with eyes that seemed to know my torment. And I realized the real battlefield wasn't the room or the circle of candles. It was inside me. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't their ritual that would decide my fate. It was my own. Sweat dripped down my forehead, sliding onto the weapon I gripped tightly, my hands betraying a faint tremor I couldn't suppress. The circle was closing. The 5 hooded men surrounding me like predators biding their time, and the woman on the floor convulsed in sobs and muffled cries. Every second of hesitation carved deeper into me. There was no more time to think. No more manuals, no protocols, no backup. Just me, my instincts, and a choice that would define me forever. In that instant, 2 images clashed inside my mind. The first was my partner, lying lifeless years ago, blood pouring between my fingers while I screamed for help that never came. I couldn't let that happen again. I couldn't watch another life vanish while I stood frozen. The second was my daughter's smile, the photo I carried folded in my wallet, her voice calling me hero. I couldn't abandon her either. I couldn't throw myself into death without a fight. Between those memories, clarity emerged. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let this cult feed on fear, mine or hers. My decision was forged in that furnace of pain. It wasn't made by the officer trained to calculate risks. It was made by the man who still believed, against all odds, that life was worth protecting. I crouched slightly, weapon locked on the scarred man's chest. The metallic snap of the hammer being cocked cracked through the room. The chants stopped instantly. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not fear, but acknowledgement that I was ready to act. My voice ripped through the silence, raw and furious. It's over. Release her now, or none of you walk out of here. Alive! The seconds that followed stretched into eternity. The figures glanced at each other, as if waiting for some unseen command. The woman whimpered, her cry slicing the silence. My finger tightened on the trigger, knowing that one more step from them and the floor would be soaked in blood. Then it came, the sound from upstairs again. Chains dragging, footsteps slow, deliberate. A deep voice murmured words I couldn't understand, yet every syllable carried authority. The hooded men dropped to their knees at once, bowing their heads in submission. It was my opening. I didn't waste it. I lunged forward, boot-knocking candles aside, breaking the circle. Heat flared against my skin, but I didn't stop. My knife cut through the ropes, binding her arms, the gag falling from her mouth. She gasped, coughing violently. "Run!" I shouted, but her body collapsed, too weak to stand. I hauled her up by the shoulders, dragging her toward the door, guns still raised at the men. They lifted their heads. Their eyes glowed with a cold animal intensity. The scarred one's lips curled into a smile, even with blood soaking his shirt. He whispered something I couldn't hear over the pounding of my pulse, but I didn't care. They wouldn't get her. They had chosen me. They thought they could break me, but I had made my choice. As I pulled her across the floor, the first figure lunged again. My weapon snapped toward him, finger steady. I wasn't leaving here as their prey. If this house was a trap, then I'd tear it apart piece by piece before letting them win. For the first time that night, I felt something sharper than fear, clarity. No more doubt, no more hesitation. I had crossed the line, and I was ready to fight until there was nothing left of me. I was done being part of their ritual. From that moment on, I was going to be the disruption they hadn't foreseen. The blast of the first gunshot cracked like thunder inside the house, shaking the walls and drowning out the chance for a heartbeat. The bullet tore into the scarred man's shoulder, spinning him back with a guttural scream that didn't sound entirely human. That single shot shattered the frozen tension, unleashing chaos. The others lunged at once, a wave of hooded figures rushing in, as if my bullet had been the signal they were waiting for. I pulled the woman toward the doorway, but she stumbled, her legs too weak to carry her weight. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing behind her gag, and I had no choice but to plant myself in front of her like a shield. The hooded figures closed in, their voices rising again, a monstrous chant layered with animal-like growls that reverberated through the house. Another shot, this time into the leg of one of them. He dropped hard, writhing, but instead of staying down, he clawed at the floor, dragging himself toward me as if pain meant nothing. My mind screamed impossible, but my body kept moving. The air reeked of blood and gunpowder, mixing with the incense into a suffocating haze. One of them reached me, swinging bare hands. I smashed the butt of my gun into his face, the crack of breaking bone echoing in my ears. He toppled backward, but the others kept pressing, circling like wolves. My chest burned, my pulse hammered in my skull, and I knew I didn't have enough rounds to stop them all. The math was against me, alone, outnumbered, with a victim to protect. And then, through the storm, salvation came. The front gate slammed open, the metallic crash followed by heavy boots pounding the yard. Shouts cut through the night. "Police! On the ground now!" Flashlights speared through the dark, beams slicing the shadows inside the house. My backup had arrived. For a brief second, the hooded figures froze, eyes reflecting the beams of light. Then the scarred man, blood dripping down his chest, raised his hand and murmured words in that same unholy tongue. Whatever he commanded, the others obeyed. They retreated, not panicked, not defeated, but controlled, like soldiers following orders. One by one, they slipped through the back door, vanishing into the night. The chants faded with them, leaving only the crackle of candles and the sound of my ragged breathing. My colleagues rushed in. Two of them lifted the woman into their arms and carried her out toward the ambulance waiting outside. Another patted my shoulder, muttering something about good work, about bravery, but I barely heard him. My eyes had locked onto the altar in the corner. I pointed at it, calling one of them over. "There were photos here, mine. I saw them." He swept his flashlight across the table. Nothing, just melted wax, dust, and crude symbols painted on the wall. No photos, no evidence, no trace of what had been there minutes before. It hit me like ice water. The proof was gone, erased. To my fellow officers, this was just another crime scene. Ropes, blood, candles, a terrified victim. But to me, it was more. It was confirmation that they knew me, that they had been waiting. And yet the only evidence of it now lived in my memory, which made me sound less like a cop and more like a madman. Outside, neighbors began to emerge from their shuttered homes, whispering to each other, peering at the flashing lights. To them, it would be a simple story, a kidnapping, a rescue, another dangerous night in the city. They'd never know the truth. The official version was already writing itself in the voices of my colleagues. Successful intervention, victim rescued, suspects fled. But inside me, the real consequences unfolded. I hadn't just stumbled into a crime. I had been marked. As I stood there in the candlelight's dying glow, weapons still in my hand, one thought pulsed through me with terrifying certainty. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The woman lay in the back of the ambulance, her breathing shallow, her body trembling as if every nerve had been scorched. I stood outside for a moment, watching, trying to steady my own heartbeat. My uniform was soaked in sweat, the smell of gunpowder clinging to me, but nothing weighed heavier than the silence between my ears. The sergeant approached, asking what had happened inside. I gave him the official version: 5 hooded suspects, 1 victim restrained, exchange of force. Suspects fled through the back. He nodded, satisfied enough, but I could see it in his eyes. Suspicion. He knew there was something I wasn't saying. Then the medic signaled for me. The woman wanted to speak, only to me. I climbed into the ambulance, pulling the door shut behind me. For a few seconds, it was just the two of us. Her eyes, bloodshot and glassy, held mine with a weight that felt like recognition. She lowered the oxygen mask with trembling hands and whispered, her voice almost breaking, They were waiting for you." The words pierced me like a blade. I asked what she meant, my throat tight. She glanced around as if the walls could be listening, then spoke again in short, urgent bursts. "Not an accident. They knew you would come. Your name, your face, was already on their altar. I saw the photos before they tied me. They talked about you, said you were chosen to continue what they started." My pulse thundered. The air seemed to shrink around me. I pressed her for more, but each sentence cost her strength. "They didn't take me by chance. I was bait. Tonight wasn't about me. It was about you. They called you the officer marked by loss. They know your pain. They've known you for a long time." I could barely breathe. My mind flashed back to that altar, to the photograph of me in uniform beside my dead partner. Proof I wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Proof they had been watching, weaving me into their story long before I ever stepped into that house. The medic moved to replace her mask, but before she let go of my arm, she squeezed it with a desperate strength and whispered one last warning. "They feed on pain. That's why they chose you. Your pain is greater than all of ours." Her words scorched into me, greater than all of theirs. I stepped out of the ambulance, the night air slamming into my lungs like ice. The sergeant was waiting. "Did she say anything useful?" he asked. I shook my head, lying without hesitation. How could I explain what she had told me? That the cult wasn't after her, that she was just the hook, that I was the prey. Outside, the street buzzed with activity, neighbors whispering, officers packing up evidence, radios crackling with reports. To everyone else, it was over, but her words replayed in my skull like a curse. They knew you. They chose you. They want you. That conversation didn't just change how I saw the case, it changed everything. Because in that moment, I understood I wasn't a rescuer who stumbled into their world. I was part of it. Whether as their enemy or their chosen successor, I had already been written into their ritual. And the question that haunted me most wasn't why me anymore. It was how long until they come. Back for me? When I got home that dawn, after hours of paperwork and endless questioning at the station, the silence inside my apartment felt heavier than any gunfight. I dropped my uniform on the floor and lay staring at the ceiling, the stench of gunpowder still clinging to my skin as if it had fused into me. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back inside that house. The circle of candles, the hooded figures, the woman gagged and pleading, and above all, the faces of men I had sworn were, already dead. It was like the border between reality and nightmare had collapsed, and I was trapped somewhere in between. But what tormented me most wasn't them. It was me. Her words in the ambulance cut deeper than any bullet. They were waiting for you. They feed on your pain. That thought cracked open wounds I had spent years trying to stitch closed. The loss of my partner, nights haunted by panic, bottles of pills hidden in drawers, the growing distance between me and my daughter. I had always told myself those were the scars of wearing the badge, the price of surviving the streets. But what if it was more than that? What if every piece of my pain had been building toward this? For the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and didn't just see a tired officer. I saw a fractured man. Part of me wanted to believe it was just another strange case. Horrific, yes, but still explainable within the chaos of crime. Yet another part whispered that I had stepped into something far older, something that had already written me into its script long before that night. And once I let that thought in, I knew nothing would ever look the same. The change inside me wasn't sudden, but it was unstoppable. I began digging through old reports, dusty files, forgotten clippings. Patterns emerged. Names resurfaced in different investigations. Symbols I thought meaningless appeared again and again in crime scenes, scattered across the city. Disappearances left without answers suddenly looked connected, threaded together by invisible hands. And every trail I followed circled back to the same shadow, the cult. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a web, and I had walked straight into its center. That realization left me standing at a crossroads. I could bury the truth, file the night away as handled, and try to reclaim the little normal life I had left. Or I could face the fact that this thing was bigger than me, bigger than the department, and plunge headfirst into it, risking everything to understand why they had chosen me. The choice should have been hard, but in truth, I already knew. I couldn't ignore it. Not after seeing my own photograph on their altar. In the days that followed, I found myself staring more often at the picture of my daughter. She's the one anchor I have left, the reason I keep moving forward. And I ask myself, what will she inherit from me? A father who ran from the darkness, or one who stood against it no matter the cost? That thought burned through me like fire. That night had shifted my entire view of the badge. I used to think I was fighting criminals, thieves, killers, traffickers, but now I understood. I was facing something that thrived on despair itself. They didn't just break laws, they broke souls. And mine, with every scar and fracture, was the perfect target. They thought my wounds made me weak. They were wrong. My wounds are the only reason I can see them for what they really are. I don't know if I came out of that house stronger or more broken. Maybe both, but I do know I'm not the same. Every patrol now feels different. Every complaint, every shadow in an abandoned street. I see signs, traces, hints of the same darkness. And I know sooner or later, they'll come again. The reflection from that night didn't give me peace. It gave me clarity. Clarity that I'm no longer just an officer answering calls. I'm part of a war no one else wants to admit exists. And when that war comes knocking again, I won't be their chosen piece. I'll be the spark they never saw coming. The night ended, but the case never truly did. Officially, it was filed as a kidnapping. A victim found bound, rescued during a police intervention, suspects unidentified and escaped. That was the neat, sanitized version stamped into the system. A cold report, stripped of the chaos, stripped of the impossible. No mention of chance echoing like thunder. No mention of dead men with familiar faces. No altar with my photograph at its center. Just the clean ink of bureaucracy, pretending to put order where there was none. The victim was placed under protective custody. At the hospital, she repeated pieces of what she had whispered to me in the ambulance, but the detectives wrote it off as trauma-induced delirium. They were waiting for the officer. They chose him. They came back from death. Her words were dismissed as hysteria. On paper, she was just another survivor. In my mind, she was the only one confirming that what I had witnessed was real. Days later, forensics combed the house. The report came back with predictable conclusions. Occult graffiti on the walls labeled as gang intimidation. Bloodstains explained away as ritualistic theatrics. Ropes and candles cataloged as evidence of confinement. Nothing extraordinary. No trace of the photographs I had seen. No altar linking me to them. To the others, it was an open and shut case of common criminals hiding behind theatrics. To me, it was proof that someone had meticulously erased the truth, leaving behind only what they wanted found. Nights afterward, the images still clawed at me. I'd close my eyes and see the scarred man's grin, hear the guttural chants, feel the woman's trembling body clinging to me. And above all, I'd hear her voice again. They feed on your pain. Those words lingered longer than any echo of gunfire. The department applauded me. Commendations, handshakes, promises of a possible promotion. Colleagues slapped my back, calling it a clean up, congratulating me on saving a life alone. But inside, I felt hollow, because I knew the truth. The cult hadn't been destroyed. They had simply stepped back into the shadows, waiting for another night, another victim, another chance. And the questions, they haunted me more than the memories. How had they vanished so quickly with the street surrounded? Why had no one else heard the chants as clearly as I had? Why had the evidence of my involvement disappeared before backup entered? None of it made sense, unless it wasn't meant to, unless the point was to make me doubt my own sanity. The case was marked closed. The city moved on, but I couldn't. I started noticing signs where I hadn't before. Symbols etched into alley walls, whispers of disappearances that never made the news, people looking away too quickly when asked questions, Piece by piece, it became clear this wasn't an isolated event. It was a network, a system, hidden beneath the city's skin. And somehow, I wasn't just stumbling into it. I was already inside. That was the real conclusion of the night. Not that I had saved someone, but that I had been claimed. Claimed by a shadow that operated beyond the reach of reports or handcuffs. A force that had tied my name to its rituals long before I knew it existed. So yes, the paperwork was filed, the evidence boxed, the victim saved. To everyone else, the job was done. But for me, it was only the opening move in a war no one else would admit was happening. The house was just a doorway, and by stepping inside, I had crossed into a labyrinth with no exit. And I knew I would hear their call again. Not through the crackle of a radio this time, but through something deeper, something that lived in the scars I carried. And when it came, I would be ready. Because that night didn't just end an operation. It ended the man I was before. Time moved forward, but that night never stopped burning inside me like an open wound. I went back to patrols, back to reports, back to the mechanical rhythm of the badge. But nothing felt the same. Every new call seemed small compared to what I had seen. And yet, in every corner of the city, in every alley or abandoned building, I searched for traces of them. Sometimes I even felt eyes on me in the crowd, silent and patient, like hunters waiting for the right moment. I carry two truths. The first is that I may never know where reality ended that night and where the abyss began. The line between crime and ritual, between the living and the dead, was erased in that house. The second is that even without answers, I cannot stop. To stop would be to surrender my daughter, my city, and myself to a darkness that thrives on silence. I understand my uniform differently now. It isn't armor, not a shield against fear. It's a reminder of duty. Fear never leaves. I feel it in every step, in every breath. But courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is deciding to walk forward despite it. I also learned that pain doesn't have to be their weapon. It can be mine. They thought my scars made me weak, that my losses had broken me. But the truth is, those wounds sharpened me. Every ghost I carry, every sleepless night, every face I couldn't save, they've become fuel. They believed they had chosen me. But I am the one who chooses what to do with my pain. I don't know when I'll face them again. Deep down, I know it's inevitable. They've marked me, written me into their story. But when that moment comes, I won't be the pawn they expect. I'll be the fire they didn't anticipate. Looking at my daughter reminds me why I can't falter. She doesn't need to know about the chants, the blood, the faces from beyond the grave. All she needs is to know her father didn't give up, that when confronted with horror, he didn't turn away. That her hero wasn't perfect, but he chose to fight. So if one day you hear screams echoing from a house that seems abandoned, don't think it's just another sound of the city. It might be something far worse. And if you wonder why men like me keep stepping into the dark, the answer is simple. Because someone has to. Because if we don't face the horror, it will eventually come for those who can't defend themselves. That's the legacy of that night. Not glory, not medals, just the memory that even surrounded by shadows, there will always be a flame burning. And as long as that flame exists, I'll be there to guard it, no matter the cost. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Which part of this story struck you the most? Your voice is what keeps this flame alive.